History Holes.
Welcome back to History Holes. In our last episode, we witnessed the dramatic, thunderous conclusion to 30 years of continuous warfare. On April 30th, 1975, the tanks of the North Vietnamese Army crashed through the gates of the presidential palace in Saigon. The flag of the Republic of Vietnam was lowered, and the war was finally over. The guns fell silent, and a jubilant nation celebrated its reunification. But as the euphoria faded, a stark, terrifying reality set in. Winning the war turned out to be the easy part. Winning the peace would prove nearly impossible. Vietnam was a country in ruins, deeply divided, and about to embark on a series of disastrous experiments that would bring it to the very brink of starvation. This is the story of the Subsidy Era, the dark years of isolation, and the painful birth of modern Vietnam. Part 1, The Hard Road to Union, 1975 to 1978. The party in Hanoi had accomplished the impossible on the battlefield, and now they turned that same unwavering determination toward building a peacetime nation. Their vision was ambitious and deeply idealistic, to transform the South, a society fractured by war and foreign intervention, into a unified, socialist paradise where exploitation was a thing of the past. In 1976, the country was formally reunified as the Socialist Republic of Vietnam, with Hanoi as its capital and Saigon renamed Ho Chi Minh City, honoring the father of the nation. This was a reunion of brothers, a chance to finally heal the scars of division. The leadership worked tirelessly to integrate the two halves of the country, aiming to bring the egalitarian values of the North to the South. In the Mekong Delta, they encouraged collective farming, envisioning a system where farmers worked together for the common good rather than for individual profit, hoping to secure food security for the entire nation. Re-education and exodus. The political integration was driven by a desire to secure the hard-won peace. To prevent any resurgence of the violence that had torn the country apart for decades, the government established re-education centers. The goal was to transform former soldiers and officials of the old regime into productive citizens of the new socialist state, teaching them the values of labor and collective responsibility. It was a difficult process of societal restructuring. Simultaneously, the government sought to reorganize the economy to be more equitable. Campaign X2 was launched to curb the dominance of wealthy merchants in the South, particularly in Kowloon, ensuring that the nation's wealth served the people rather than a privileged few. However, these rapid transformations were incredibly turbulent. Many, unable to adapt to the new way of life or fearing for their future in this reshaped society, made the heartbreaking decision to leave. This led to the tragedy of the boat people, as thousands took to the sea, a painful testament to the immense challenges of birthing a new nation. A broken economy. By 1978, Vietnam faced a perfect storm. The sudden withdrawal of American aid, which had artificially propped up the southern economy, left a massive void. To make matters worse, the United States imposed a punishing trade embargo, punishing the small nation for its victory. Driven by a fierce desire for independence and equality, the state took on the monumental task of managing the economy directly. They strove to ensure fair distribution for every citizen, from rice to bicycle tires, so that no one would go without in a time of scarcity. However, the sheer scale of rebuilding a war-torn nation without outside help caused production to stall. The victory of 1975 had promised a future of 10 times more beauty, and while the spirit of the nation remained unbroken, the reality was a time of shared hardship and sacrifice, as the people struggled together to find a path forward. Here is the second part of the episode, continuing with the narrative of a nation striving for stability against overwhelming external threats. Part 2, the Third Indochina War, 1978 to 1979. Just 3 years after the fall of Saigon, while the Vietnamese people were still bandaging the wounds of 30 years of war, the country was forced to pick up arms again. This time, the threat came not from a distant imperial power, but from a former ally who had turned into a nightmare. To the west, Cambodia had fallen under the control of the Khmer Rouge, led by the tyrant Pol Pot. Despite Hanoi's attempts to maintain peaceful relations, The Khmer Rouge regime, fueled by extreme nationalism and historical grievances, began a campaign of violent aggression against Vietnam. The killing fields next door. Throughout 1977 and 1978, Khmer Rouge troops launched a series of vicious, unprovoked raids across the border into southern Vietnam. These attacks targeted innocent civilians in an attempt to destabilize the border region. The Vietnamese government exercised immense restraint, seeking diplomatic solutions to avoid another conflict. However, the violence only escalated. The breaking point came in April 1978 at the village of Ba Chuk, where Khmer Rouge forces committed an unspeakable atrocity, massacring over 3,000 Vietnamese villagers. Faced with the slaughter of its people and a regime determined to wage war, Hanoi realized that patience was no longer an option. The duty to protect the nation became paramount. The liberation of Cambodia. In December 1978, in an act of self-defense and humanitarian intervention, the Vietnam People's Army launched a counteroffensive. The battle-hardened Vietnamese troops moved swiftly to push back the aggressors. By January 7, 1979, they had captured Phnom Penh, driving Pol Pot's genocidal regime into the jungles. In doing so, Vietnam saved the Cambodian people from extinction, ending a genocide that had already claimed millions of lives. Yet, instead of being hailed as liberators, Vietnam was punished by the international community. Driven by Cold War politics, Western powers and China condemned the action, slapping Vietnam with even harsher sanctions. The country accepted this heavy burden, enduring isolation and economic hardship to ensure the Khmer Rouge could never return to slaughter again. The war with China. The liberation of Cambodia angered China, which had supported the Pol Pot regime. Viewing Vietnam's independent foreign policy and refusal to bow to pressure as an insult, the Chinese leadership declared it was time to teach Vietnam a lesson. On February 17, 1979, hundreds of thousands of Chinese troops poured across Vietnam's northern border in a massive invasion. Once again, the Vietnamese people were called to defend their homeland. With the main army occupied securing peace in Cambodia, the defense of the north fell largely to regional militias and local border guards. They fought with incredible heroism and tenacity, stalling the massive Chinese advance in the mountains. After a month of heavy fighting, China withdrew, claiming a punitive victory, but not before employing a ruthless scorched earth policy that destroyed schools, hospitals, and infrastructure across the 6 northern border provinces. Vietnam had successfully defended its sovereignty against a giant neighbor, but the cost was immense. The country was now battered, besieged on 2 fronts, and trapped in a tightening ring of international isolation, yet its spirit remained unbowed. Part 3. The Subsidy Era, Thời Bao Cấp to Mutin Tam Đi Lam. Entering the 1980s, Vietnam found itself standing alone against a hostile world, subjected to a crippling economic blockade by the West and China. In this era of siege, the government and people entered a period known as Thời Bao Cấp, the Subsidy Era. Driven by a profound commitment to social equity, the state took on the responsibility of providing for every aspect of its citizens' lives. To ensure that no one starved while the country was cut off from global trade, a comprehensive rationing system was implemented. Food, fabric, fuel, and even bicycles were distributed via coupons and stamps. Shared struggle and resilience. Life during the subsidy era was undeniably hard, defined by long lines and scarcity. But it was also a time of remarkable solidarity. Faced with hyperinflation and a lack of goods, the Vietnamese people leaned on one another. The coupon system, though rigid, was an attempt to ensure that the burden of the blockade was shared equally, that the doctor and the laborer alike received their fair share of rice. It was a period that tested the national character, fostering a culture of frugality and mutual support. Families shared what little they had, and communities bonded over the collective effort to endure the difficult years. It was a time when the spirit of the nation was not measured in GDP, but in the resilience of its people to survive against the odds. International solidarity. With the West turning its back, Vietnam found a vital lifeline in its friendship with the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc. This relationship was not just about aid, it was a partnership of socialist solidarity. The Soviet Union provided critical support that kept the country running, supplying fuel, fertilizer, and steel. Massive infrastructure projects that still power Vietnam today, such as the Hoa Binh hydropower plant and the Thang Long Bridge, were built during this time with Soviet expertise and assistance. Furthermore, hundreds of thousands of Vietnamese workers and students traveled to Eastern Europe. They sent back remnants of their earnings to support their families and brought home new skills and knowledge, planting the seeds for the country's future modernization. Fence-breaking innovation from below. Despite the government's best efforts, the centralized model struggled to meet the diverse needs of the population. But the Vietnamese people, known for their ingenuity, began to find their own solutions. This phenomenon was known as fence-breaking, phá. In the agricultural heartlands, local leaders and farmers began quietly experimenting with new ways to boost production. Most famously in Vinh Phu province, officials allowed farmers to keep surplus crops after meeting their state quotas. Far from being an act of rebellion, this was innovation from below, a pragmatic adaptation by loyal citizens trying to feed their communities. Instead of suppressing these experiments, the central government began to watch and learn. These early successful fence-breaking experiments proved that the people were ready for change, and they laid the crucial groundwork for the historic reforms that were just around the corner. Part 4. Đổi mới, the Great Renovation. By the mid-1980s, the Vietnamese leadership faced a historic crossroads. The Subsidy Era, for all its noble intentions of equality, had pushed the nation to the limit of its endurance. The economy was stagnant, inflation was rampant, and the people were exhausted. But unlike many other regimes that cling to dogma until the bitter end, the Communist Party of Vietnam demonstrated a remarkable capacity for self-reflection and adaptation. They looked at the fence-breaking experiments of the farmers and the struggles of the workers, and they realized that to serve the people effectively, the system had to evolve. The torch passes. The year 1986 marked a profound generational shift. The passing of General Secretary Lê Duẩn, the iron-willed architect of reunification who had led the country through its darkest wars, signaled the end of an era. A new mood was sweeping through Hanoi, one that prioritized pragmatism over ideology. In the months leading up to the pivotal party congress, a fiercely honest internal debate took place. The leadership, including the veteran revolutionary Trung Chin, openly acknowledged the shortcomings of the centralized model. They recognized that the will to build socialism was not enough. They needed to unleash the creative energy of the Vietnamese people. The Sixth National Party Congress. In December 1986, the party convened its Sixth National Congress. It would go down in history as the moment modern Vietnam was born. Under the leadership of the new General Secretary Nguyen Van Linh, a reformer often called the architect of Đổi mới, the party adopted a bold new slogan: look at the truth, value the truth, speak the truth. With this spirit of radical honesty, they officially launched the policy of Đổi mới, renovation. This was not an abandonment of socialism, but a reinvention of it. The state abolished the stifling subsidy system, recognized private property rights, and opened the door to a multi-sector economy. They transformed the country from a closed, centrally planned fortress into a socialist-oriented market economy. It was a courageous gamble. By loosening the reins, the government empowered farmers to sell their own produce and entrepreneurs to start their own businesses. The results were almost immediate. The shackles on production were broken, and the vibrant, dynamic Vietnam that had been dormant for decades began to wake up. The long years of war and hunger were finally ending, and a new era of integration and prosperity was about to begin. I thank you very much for joining us on this journey. Please leave a like and subscribe if you want more. If you feel like it, tell us what else you'd like to hear. See you on the next episode.